Hello. In this video, I'll be describing some elementary metallic alchemy work. The first step in creating a metallic oil. So right now, all I will be covering is the first three steps initially, meaning taking your metal, converting it into an oxide, and then converting it into a mineral crystal. So that's really where I'm at with this kind of work, which is just focusing on growing good crystals, and yeah, that's about it. From there, they will be dry distilled, but I haven't really gotten to that point yet. So here I have a few different jars of some stuff that I have already begun to work with. I'm starting with copper, and so this stuff is already in the acetate form. Here's a bag of atomized copper powder. So this is some very fine copper powder, and it gets oxidized and then turned into copper acetate, which is the blue stuff. So the first step is to take the metallic form of the metal, which would be this atomized copper, and burn it. So this is the philosophical killing of the metal. This is where it dies and is then opened up to be revivified with a life force and then created into a mineral form. So this is basically all you need to do. Is I have a pot right here that is dedicated to metallic work. So I would recommend that any metallic work that you're doing, your vessels are basically dedicated to the metals, because it just feels right to me to not mix the realms. Anyone who is into alchemy probably knows that it is generally advised to start within the plant world and get used to a lot of the techniques, the distillation, calcination, fermentation, all of that stuff with the plants before moving into the metallic world. And then you can move on to the metals. I've done a lot of plant work for a number of years, and I'm a chemistry student, so I felt pretty comfortable entering the metallic works. I still have not gotten my proper setup going for dry distillation, so right now I'm just focusing on the growing of crystals. So what I'll be doing with this stuff, let me see if I can get it on a decent shot. I have a Pyrex tray here. I will be putting it inside of a drawer in order for it to evaporate and then form the crystals. I put it in a drawer just to keep it safe from dust or anything like that, and let it slowly evaporate. So you probably won't see this, but I'm just going to pour out this copper acetate solution. I'm also not wearing gloves, but I'm being very careful. A little bit of copper won't hurt you. So I'm pouring out that solution into the tray. I can see little bits of unreacted copper, but this will be repeated many times in order to obtain highly pure crystals. That's the best way to get very pure crystals, is to repeat the recrystallization, repeat the calcination, the converting of the metal into the oxide, and then having the oxide react with the acetate in order to form the blue solution that you see in that jar. That reaction can be sped up with heat, which is what I did to obtain that blue solution that you saw there. You can take, once the copper, it turns black once it's oxidized. So it goes from the form of copper that you know, the color copper. Once you heat it at a few hundred degrees, it turns black into copper 2 oxide, and then it is open to be reacted with the acetate, which is vinegar. So in these jars you see here, it's basically just white wine vinegar. You can also concentrate your white wine vinegar to obtain a stronger vinegar spirit that will you'll have a nice lower, smaller volume to deal with for when it comes to the evaporation. So that's always good. So in a few days that vinegar will evaporate, and then I'll be left with the acetate crystals that I will gather and then recrystallize over and over again to obtain as pure of a crystal as possible. So this stuff I'm just letting react over time without heating, without giving it any speeding it up with the heat. I could take this solution and put it in a flask and heat it, or just put the jar in a heat bath, and that would probably speed it up. But I'm kind of just enjoying watching what happens. Over the past few days, it was bubbling quite a lot, and then it's taken on this cloudy brown color where you can see the bottom of the jar. There's a little bit of a clear layer where this is all the copper oxide that's sitting at the bottom, and then we have this brown cloud that is forming. Not exactly sure what that is. In maybe a month or two's time, that solution should be blue. So this is kind of new to me, so I'm seeing what happens there. This copper will be, I'll open up this bag and try to scrape out all of the copper dust that I can, and I will oxidize the rest of it. This is the philosophical killing of the metal and opening up its soul and spirit for revivification. So the menstruum that's used is vinegar, which is from the vegetable kingdom, really. So once you have the dead copper, the copper oxide, you add the life force back by exposing it to the vinegar, which it then turns into the mineral crystal. Once again, returns to a crystal form after it evaporates. The metal is kind of a crystal in its own right, but it's not a mineral crystal. The mineral is an ionic complex where you have the copper as one side bonded with the acetate. So you have copper ion, acetate ion coming together to form that blue crystal. And as far as I understand how the dry distillation works, it's like the copper is present as a catalyst. The heat between the heat and the atmosphere and the acetate ion, that those things react in the presence of the copper to produce the spirit and the soul, the oil of the metal. Apparently, copper acetate isn't very good for producing a lot of oil or a very good oil, as far as I've heard, but it's a good starting point because copper's not all that dangerous to work with. It would be more dangerous to deal with lead. I mean, you do obviously want to be careful with it, but I used to test a whole lot of metals in labs, and I was exposed to a lot of nasty stuff, so I'm kind of used to it, and I'm just being careful. But you ideally want to use gloves and everything, but I just poured this jar into a glass tray, so we're pretty good. Once my pot over here dries, I'll be adding the atomized copper into it to get some more. I will probably be getting some more copper because I want a higher mass of final crystals, and some is obviously lost throughout the whole process. In this jar, you can see some of the blue copper acetate has formed and some crystals forming on the side. There's a bit of unreacted copper at the bottom there, so I'll do my best to separate that out and then oxidize it again and then introduce it to more vinegar. What I plan to do for maybe the rest of the copper and the next time is to get a white wine vinegar bottle, put it in the freezer. This freezes the water and pushes the concentrated acetic acid out. So, and then you can just pour off the concentrated acetic acid and then leave the block of ice behind, so you'll have a much higher percentage vinegar or acetic acid solution, which will be a little bit better for working. You always want to work with smaller volumes. It's just a little bit better that way. So that's pretty much it. for now, this is just where I'm at with some of these metallic works. The other thing I wanted to bring up that is incredibly important, that is really what the alchemy is all about, is that when you're doing this work, it's a reflection of your own inner processes. So whatever's going on in your flasks, in your beakers, and your pots and retorts and everything else, that is a reflection of your own consciousness. So um, I've had this stuff going for a while and kind of neglected it. And I realized that, wow, I really need to get going and progress with this work so that I am not in a period of stagnation, especially working with copper, and copper being the heart, right? Resonating with the heart and with Venus. So as far as my personal life goes, dealing with some matters of the heart, I won't go into it, but I realized that maybe some of the stagnation or some of the problems that I had been facing was that I had some of this work, some of this copper that I'm dealing with, that I had just left in stagnation. I had some of these crystals half grown. I had some of the oxide just sitting in a jar that I had not revivified with the vinegar, and I have a bag of metallic copper that is waiting to be worked with. So if I can get all of the copper that I do have in one state together, go through the killing of the metal, the philosophical destruction of the metal, the oxidation, and then the revivifying with the vinegar, maybe there'll be a reflection within my own life, because that is what I experience with this alchemical work. It's a very subtle sort of thing. It requires your attention. It's not necessarily going to slap you in the face, but it's there. Anytime you're doing this work, you're doing the same work within your consciousness. And that is the true value of the alchemical work, that the laboratory works function as a mirror, function as a reflection of your own consciousness. So these are some pretty far out concepts, but everything is wholly connected. I mean, this is what some work with psychedelics will show you, and why I really like alchemical work is because it's a more subtle way of dealing with those energies, working with those energies, and seeing how it's reflected in your own life. And I think in many ways the types of changes that are imparted through psychedelics or through similar sorts of things, where you're essentially unraveling your karma in a way that's a little bit faster. You're forced to deal with changes. You're forced to deal with challenges and aspects of yourself that you may had been neglecting, or you may had tried not to look at or something. Psychedelics can be very earth-shattering. They can be very, very challenging, and use a very heavy hand in all of this stuff, and it can really turn your world inside out and upside down. And I'm sure alchemy can in the same way. But with my experience with it, it's a lot more subtle. It uses a much more gentle hand in opening you up to recognizing some of these ebbs and flows, some of these energies that are going on in your life that are dictating how you react, how you live, the experiences you have. And if you don't do this kind of work, wherever you're at with all of those different archetypal energies, will dictate your life, whether you know it or not. Like Jung says, until the unconscious is made conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it coincidence or something else. But there are states that we sit at within all of these different archetypal energies that are present in your body, represented by the chakra points, the energy centers within the body that reflect the planetary bodies. And whether you have faced these things and dealt with them will then dictate how those themes unfold within your life. So yeah, that's about it. That's about it. We're getting to 15 minutes here. And I'll follow up this video maybe showing some of the crystals as they grow, or showing some of the next parts, but I think it's important to carry on this work, stay on top of it, keep going, and it reflects within the context of your life. Have a good day, everyone.